So each middle ear contains 3 tiny bones which are called as malleus, incus and stapes. The vertebral column is the one that actually protects the spinal cord, and not just that, it supports our head to stand upright. So pectoral girdle and the pelvic girdle, they are articulated, or they help in joining the upper and the lower limbs respectively. Hello everyone, a warm welcome to the last session of this chapter 20, that is Locomotion and Movement. I am Dr. Divya, Biology Faculty, Vidhyaashram Pre-University College, Mysuru, Temple of Excellence. So in the previous session of this chapter, we had discussed about the structure of two important contractile proteins, that is actin and myosin, and also we learnt about the mechanism of contraction of the muscle, and we learnt about two types of muscles, that is the red fibers and the white fibers. In today's session, we shall study about the skeletal system of the human body, because skeletons also play an important role in locomotion and movement, and also we shall study about the disorders of the muscle and the skeletal system. Learning about this, we shall begin with studying the skeletal system of the human body. So, a skeleton is the framework, right? Of course, a body is made up of muscles, but imagine if we did not have a skeleton, how would our muscles be? It should just be without any shape, right? It is a skeleton, just like how we put a photo in a photo frame, so that the photo gets held in a proper place, giving a photo a proper shape. Just like that, the skeleton also forms a frame to a body, giving a proper structure to a body. So it consists of a framework of bones and also a few cartilages. Apart from having hard bones, there are also certain soft bones or cartilages present in a skeletal system. Cartilages are the soft bones. Say for example, a ear. Our ears contain cartilages. That is why we are able to move our ear, fold our ears and all that. Even a nose also, it contains cartilage. So apart from having bones, cartilage is also a component of the skeletal system. So bone and cartilage both are specialized connective tissues. Of course, right, they are connective tissue because they form a connection between the muscles. So that is why. And the bone, it has a very hard matrix. It is very, very hard. Why? Because it contains a lot of calcium salts, and the cartilage is slightly pliable matrix. That is, it is a soft matrix due to the presence of chondroitin salts. So cartilages, they have chondroitin salts. That is why they are soft. Bones have calcium salts. That is why they are hard. And in human beings, the entire skeletal system is made up of 206 bones and very few cartilages or the soft bones. And it grouped into two main divisions, that is the axial skeleton and the appendicular skeleton. So we shall see these two skeletal systems. So axial skeleton, when I say, it is nothing but a skull, the sternum and of a ribs, all that comes under the spinal cord, all that comes under the axial skeleton. And rest of the bones, skeleton of the limbs, the arms, the fingers, everything comes under the appendicular skeleton. So based on this two grouping, we shall study the skeletal system of the humans. So to start with, let us study about the axial skeleton. So axial skeleton, it is made up of 80 bones. So how many bones I said? 206 bones. Out of the 206 bones, 80 bones are under the axial skeleton. And it is distributed along the main axis of the body, that is a skull, then a spinal cord and the sternum. So sternum is present in between the ribs. So all that comes under the axial skeleton. So it consists of the skull, the vertebral column, the sternum and also the ribs. They form the axial skeleton. How many bones are there? 80 bones it is made up of. So talking about the skull, which is the first axial skeleton. So the skull is composed of two sets of bones, the cranial bone and the facial bone, and it has total of 22 bones. So in the axial skeleton, how many bones did I say? I told you totally the human body has 206 bones. In that, 80 bones are of axial skeletons, and in that axial skeleton means it is the skull, the sternum, the spinal cord and the ribs. So, in the skull how many bones are there? 22 in the skull. So, 22 bones are there in the skull, and these bones are divided into cranial and facial bones. So, this is the facial bone and the entire skull is the cranial bone. So, cranial bone. In that cranial bone are 8 in number. So, out of this 8 is cranial bone. Rest 14 is facial bone. So, 8 out of the 22, 8 is made up of cranial bone and 14 is of facial bone. Totally 22 bones are present. So, cranial bones, they are 8 in number. They form the hard protective outer covering, that is the cranium for the brain. If you can see here, this part, this entire part starting from here up till here, it is the cranial bone of the skull. Next, talking about the facial bone. So, it is made up of 14 skeletal elements. It is the front part of the skull. So, this part, it is a facial bone. So, 14 bone elements are present and it forms the front part of the skull, and it has a single U-shaped bone called as the hyoid bone, which is present at the base of the buccal cavity, and it is also included in the skull itself, or it is included in the cranial bones. But apart from all these, you can see this hyoid bone. It is present just below the buccal cavity. So, this hyoid bone comes under the cranial bones itself, or the skull bones. So, this was about the cranial bones and the facial bones of the skull. Next, studying about these in detail. So, talking of the skull. So, each middle ear contains 3 tiny bones which are called as malleus, incus and stapes, and they are together called as the ear ossicles. And the skull region, it articulates with the superior region of the vertebral column. That's true, right? True. Because the skull, it continues and it articulates with the spinal cord. Articulates with the spinal cord. So, it articulates with the superior region of the vertebral column with the help of 2 occipital condyles, which is called as the dicondylic skull. So, if you can see here, the skull at the back, it articulates or it joins together, entering into the vertebral column or the spinal cord, and it is articulated by 2 important bones which are called as the 2 occipital condyles. So, these occipital condyles actually articulates the skull with the spinal cord or the vertebral column. So, next, talking about the vertebral column. So, vertebral column also comes under the axial skeleton. So, it is formed by 26 serially arranged units which is called as vertebrae, and it is dorsally placed. So, if you can see here, they are made up of 26 units which are called as vertebrae. 26 units of vertebrae, and they are arranged dorsally, or they are placed dorsally, and it extends from the base of the skull, that is from the occipital condyle of the skull. It extends from the base of the skull and it constitutes the main framework of the trunk. It extends from the skull towards the trunk of a body. So, as you can see here, from the skull, that is the occipital condyle bone of the skull, it extends through the entire thoracic region of a body, and each vertebrae has a central hollow portion which is called as the neural canal, and it is through these neural canal that the spinal cord passes. So, if you can see, each of these, I told you they are made up of 26 units, right? And each of these are hollow in nature, and it is through these hollow bones that the spinal cord actually passes. And first vertebrae is called as the atlas, and it articulates or connects with the occipital condyle. So, I told you the spinal cord starts from the occipital condyle, and the first bone that connects to the occipital condyle of the brain, or the occipital condyle bone of the brain, it is called as the atlas. So, this bone is called as the atlas. Next, moving further, the vertebral column is again differentiated into cervical region. So this part, the neck part, cervical region, it is made up of 7 bones, and next is the thoracic region, which is made up of 12 bones, and next is lumbar region, which is made up of 5 bones, and we have lumbar with 5 bones, sacral with 1 fused bone, and the coccygeal with 1 fused bone. So coccygeal is nothing but the tail part. So this is 1 fused bone, sarcum is 1 fused bone, next 12 bones, that is in the thoracic region. So these are the different bones of the cervical cord or the vertebral column. So the number of cervical vertebrae are 7 in almost all the mammals, including the human being. So total, how many cervicals, that is in the neck part, how many cervical bones do we have? We have 7 cervical bones. And the vertebral column is the one that actually protects the spinal cord. And not just that, it supports our head to stand upright, and also it serves as the point of attachment for the ribs as well, and the musculature of the back. So for all these, they are very important. Therefore, they form a framework for a thoracic region of our body. So these are the functions of the vertebral column. Moving further, we shall talk about the other axial skeleton, that is the sternum and the ribs. So sternum is the flat bone that is present on the ventral midline of the thorax. So if you can see here, exactly at the center, you can see the sternum present. So it is a flat bone, and on either side of the sternum, the ribs are arranged. There are 12 pairs of ribs that are arranged on either side of the sternum, and each rib is also a flat bone which is connected dorsally to the vertebral column, and it is connected ventrally to the sternum. So it is connected ventrally to the sternum and dorsally to the vertebral column, and it has 2 articulation surfaces on its dorsal end, and hence it is called as the bicephalic. So it has 2 joints in the dorsal end, 2 joints are there, so that is why it is called as the bicephalic. So ribs are also called as bicephalic in nature. Moving on to the ribs. How many bones are there in the ribs? So first 7, so I told you there are totally 12 pairs, right? So first 7 pairs of ribs are called as the true ribs. Why they are called as the true ribs? Because they are very neatly arranged. If you can see them, they are attached to the sternum. Can you see all of these are attached to the sternum directly. So that is why they are called as true ribs. But if you can see the 8th, 9th, 10th, 11th and 12th, they are not directly attached to the sternum. First 7 pairs of ribs are called as true ribs because they are dorsally attached to the thoracic vertebrae, and they are ventrally connected to the sternum with the help of a hyaline cartilage. So they are connected to the sternum. So that is why, and to the vertebral column. So that is why they are called as the true ribs. That is true ribs. That is first to the 7 pairs of the ribs. What about the 8th, 9th and 10th pair? The 8th, 9th and 10th pair of the ribs, they do not directly join to the sternum, but they join to the 7th rib with the help of a hyaline cartilage. So if you can see here, these 8th, 9th and 10th, they do not join to the sternum, but they are joining to the 7th rib. If you can see here, they do not articulate directly with the sternum, but instead they are connected to the 7th rib, and therefore they are called as the false ribs, or they are called as the vertebrochondral. So what are the vertebral chondrals? Vertebral chondrals are the 8th, 9th and the 10th rib that are not directly connected to the sternum, but indirectly they are connected to the sternum through the 7th rib, because they are connected to the 7th rib. So therefore they are called as the false ribs. And the last 2 pairs that are there, the 11th one and 12th one, if you can see, they are called as the floating ribs because they are not connected anywhere. So the last 2 pairs, the 11th and 12th ribs, are not connected ventrally, and therefore they are called as the floating ribs. So thoracic vertebrae, ribs and the sternum together, they form the rib cage. So rib cage is made up of the thoracic vertebrae, the ribs and the sternum. All these forms the rib cage. So this was about the ribs. So if you can see here, this is the vertebral column, and it is through these vertebral column that the spinal cord enters. So vertebral column we have studied in the previous slide. So this was about the structure of the ribs. Moving further, we shall study about the appendicular skeleton. So when we say appendicular skeleton, all the bones apart from those belonging to the skull, the vertebral column and the ribs, rest all are the appendicular skeleton. That is the bones of our hands, limbs and all that. So the bones of the limbs along with their girdles, they constitute the appendicular skeleton. So let's study about each of these one by one. So let's first study about the bones of the limbs. So when I say limbs, it can be both the hands as well as the legs. So each limb is made up of 30 bones, and the bones of the hand, that is the forelimb, are humerus, radius, ulna and carpals. That is the wrist bone. So if you can see, the bones of the hand are made up of humerus, the scalpels, the radius, the ulna, and it is made up of the carpals. Carpals is nothing but the wrist part. The wrist part is the carpals. And the wrist part, it is made up of 8 bones. So the wrist bones are 8 in number, wherein the metacarpals are 5 in number and the phalanges are 14 in number. So if you can see here, the metacarpals are 5 in number. That is our hands. They are 5 in number and the phalanges are 14 in number. So 14 means here 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 and the other side it is together it is 14. And the phalanges, that is the digits, are 14 in number. Next, moving further, we shall study about the limbs, that is our legs. What are the bones present in the legs? In the legs, there is the longest bone that is present, which is called as the femur, or it is the thigh bone, and it is the longest bone. Apart from that, it is made up of tibia, fibula, tarsals, that is the ankle bones, and these ankle bones are 7 in number. So if you can see here, they consist of the femur bone, which is the longest bone. It consists of tibia, it consists of fibula, and it consists of tarsals. This tarsals is again made up of metatarsals and phalanges. Exactly how in the hands we had, that is wrist was called as metacarpals. Here the ankle is called as metatarsal. The bone that is present from the ankle to the toes, that is called as the metatarsals, and the toes, the bones present in the toes are called as the phalanges. So we shall study about them. Metatarsals are 5 in number. Phalanges here also, they are 14 in number, and the bones of the legs are called as the hind limb. So there is a difference in forelimb and hind limb. So the bones of our hands are called as the forelimb, the bones of the legs are called as the hind limb. And there is a cup-shaped bone called as patella, which covers the knee ventrally. That is nothing but the knee cap. So we also have the knee cap, which is called as the patella. So this is the knee cap that is present. So this is the structure of the bone of our hind limbs. Moving further, let us study about the girdles. I told you, other than the bones of the limbs, the girdles also come under the appendicular skeleton. So we shall study about the pectoral girdle and the pelvic girdle bones. So pectoral girdle and the pelvic girdle, they are articulated, or they help in joining the upper and the lower limbs respectively. So, and with that of the axial skeleton. So, if you can see, our hands, they are connected to the axial skeleton by the shoulder bone, right? Just like that, our legs are also connected to the axial skeleton by the pelvic bone. So that is how they are called as, they help in articulation or joining of the hind limbs and the forelimbs with that of the axial skeleton. And each girdle is formed of 2 halves. That is true, right? They are formed of 2 halves. So if you can see here, we have the pectoral girdle that connects our forelimbs, our arms with that of the axial skeleton, and we have the pelvic girdle that connects our leg with that of the axial skeleton. So this is about the pectoral and the pelvic girdle. Moving further, we shall study about the pectoral girdle in detail. So each half of the pectoral girdle, it consists of, I told you they are made up of two halves, right? It consists of clavicle and consists of scapula. So if you can see here, it consists of scapula and it consists of clavicle. So clavicle is nothing but the collar bone. So talking about the scapula. So scapula, it is a large triangular flat bone and it is situated in the dorsal part of the thorax between the second and the seventh rib. If you can see here, scapula is present between the second and the seventh rib. So that is the scapula. And that second and seventh rib is also connected to our arms. So that is why they also come under the girdle bone, which is called as the scapula or the pectoral girdle bone, scapula. So the dorsal flat triangular body of the scapula has a slightly elevated ridge, which is called as the spine, which projects as a flat expanded process called as the acromion. So apart from this, the scapula, if you can see, it has a flat expanded portion which is called as the acromion. So this was about the scapula. Next, talking about the clavicle, which is the collar bone. So the clavicle joins with the scapula and below the acromion is a small depression. So there is a plate-like structure, right? That is the acromion. And below the acromion, somewhere between the clavicle and the acromion, there is a depression here. There is a depression which is called as the glenoid cavity. This part that you can see, this depression is called as the glenoid cavity, and this depression articulates or joins with our head. Articulates with the head of the humerus to form the shoulder joint. So, if you can see here, the small depression, it continues or it articulates to form the head of a shoulder joint. So, that is how each of these bones are interconnected to one another. And each clavicle is a long slender bone. If you can see on either sides, we have each clavicle is a long slender bone with two curvatures, and this bone is commonly called as the collar bone. So that was about the clavicle. If you can see here, they are two slender bones with slight curvature. They are curved a bit and they are called as the collar bone. So this is about the clavicle. Next, moving further, we shall talk about the pelvic girdle. So pelvic girdle consists of two coxal bones. This is also made up of two halves of bones, that is, they are made up of two coxal bones, and each coxal bone is formed by the fusion of three bones, that is ilium, ischium and pubis. So they are made up of the fusion of ilium, ischium and pubis bone. So together they are called as the coxal bone. What are they made up of? They are made up of three types of bones: ilium, ischium and pubis bone. And at the point of fusion of the ilium, ischium and pubis bone is a cavity called as the acetabulum, to which the thigh bone is attached. The thigh bone, that is the femur. If you can see, the femur is attached to this particular cavity of the coxal bone. And the two halves of the pelvic girdle, they meet ventrally to form the pubic symphysis containing fibrous cartilage. So, half of this and half of this, they will meet, two pelvic girdles, they will meet at a point which is called as, and that particular point, it is made up of a soft bone which is called as the pubic symphysis. So that is about the pelvic girdle. Moving further, we shall study about the joints. So joints are essential for all types of movements, right? So each of our bones have joints. A hand has a joint which is called as the elbow. There also there is a bone being present. Our thigh bone and the lower part of our leg is connected with the knee, right? There also a joint is present. So let us study about these joints, and these joints are very, very important for all the types of movement to occur in the bony parts of the body. And joints are points of contact between the bones, between the cartilage as well. So that is why, because they act as points of, or else if you imagine, if a hand was a continuous stretch of bone, would be able to move the hands like this? No, because there is a joint that is present, we are able to move it freely. So therefore, the joints are points of contact between the bones as well as between the cartilages. And the force generated by the muscles is used to carry out movement throughout the joints, and where the joint acts as a fulcrum. The movability of these joints vary depending on different factors. That is, depending on the age also, the movement of the joints tend to vary. And joints have been classified into three main types, that is fibrous joints, cartilaginous joints and synovial joints. So let us study about these. What are the fibrous joints? So fibrous joints, they do not allow any movement. They are not involved in any movement. And this type of fibrous joint is shown by the flat skull bones. So, in a skull bones, there are fibrous joints are present, which do not move. So, if you can see here, these are the fibrous joints between the skull that is present, the fibrous joints, and also between the junction between an ankle and a leg also, there is the fibrous joint that is present. So, this is about the fibrous joints. Moving further, we have the cartilaginous joints. So, in cartilaginous joints, the bones are joined together with the help of a cartilage, that is the soft bone, and the joint between the adjacent vertebrae of the vertebral column is of this pattern and it permits limited movement. So, cartilaginous joints, they actually permit limited movement, but fibrous joints, they do not permit any movement at all, and those are the joints that were found in the skull region, but the cartilaginous joints are actually present between the adjacent vertebral column and they help in limited movement. That is why we are able to bend and stand upright and all that. So that is about the cartilaginous joints. Next, moving further, we shall study about the synovial joints. So synovial joints are characterized by the presence of a fluid-filled synovial cavity which is present between the articulating surface of two bones. So, where two bones meet, there in between the synovial joints will be present. And those synovial joints are filled with the fluid. That is why we are able to move everything properly. And such an arrangement allows considerable movement. So, fibrous joints do not exhibit any movement. The cartilaginous joints exhibit movement to some extent, but the synovial joints, they help in complete movement of the bones. And these joints therefore help in locomotion and also in many other movements. So, we have the ball and the sockets which is present between the humerus and the pectoral girdle. So, pectoral girdle and humerus means between a hand and the shoulder there is a ball and socket like mechanism which helps us in moving easily. So, that is one example for synovial joints. Then we have the hinge joint, that is the knee joint, and we have the pivot joint between the atlas and the axis, and we have the gliding joint between the carpals, that is our fingers. We have gliding joints present so that we can easily fold and open our fingers and all that, and the saddle joint between the carpal and the metacarpal. We can even move our wrist, right? So that is because of the presence of the saddle joint, and all these are some of the examples. And not just that, the saddle joint present between the carpal and the metacarpal of the thumb. So there also between the carpal and the metacarpal of the thumb, this portion also there is presence of the saddle joint. So these are the ones that actually help in the movement. So we have the hinge joint, as you can see, then the ball and socket joint between the shoulder and the arm, then the hinge joint between this particular portion, the hinge joint, then we have the pivot joint and the girdle joints and all that. So all these are the examples for the synovial joints. So moving further, we shall study about what are the different disorders that can occur in the muscles and the skeletal system. So first disorder is the myasthenia gravis. So myasthenia gravis is an autoimmune disorder. So autoimmune disorder means our immune cells itself starts attacking our own body cells. In this particular case, they will start attacking the cells of the muscles. Therefore, it is an autoimmune disorder which affects the neuromuscular junction. So, where is the neuromuscular junction present? It is present between the sarcolemma of the muscle fibers and the motor neuron, right? So there it will cause a problem leading to fatigue, weakening and paralysis of the skeletal muscle. So if you can see here how there is a person shown who is not suffering from myasthenia gravis, but the other person suffering from myasthenia gravis. So you can see a change in her muscular structure. So this is about myasthenia gravis. Next, talking about the muscular dystrophy. So this is a progressive degenerative disorder of the skeletal muscle, mostly due to genetic disorder. It is a genetic disorder. Some alteration in the genes can cause this particular disorder, wherein it will cause degeneration of the muscles of surrounding the skeletal muscles, which will lead to a change in the structure of the body. So that is nothing but muscular dystrophy. Next important disorder, it is the tetany. So here in person suffering from tetany, he'll experience rapid spasms, that is very wild contractions, too much of contraction of the muscles due to low calcium in the body. Because high calcium can cause the required contraction of the muscle, but very low calcium can cause wild contractions of the muscle. He'll not be able to stretch the hands and all that properly because of that particular reason. So because of low contraction in the muscles or rapid spasms occurring in the muscle, and that particular disorder of the muscle is called as tetany. Moving further, there is disorder of the bone which is called as arthritis. So in arthritis, inflammation of the joints will occur. So the joints between the wrist and the metacarpals, between the carpal and the metacarpals, between the fingers, everywhere we can find the swelling occurring. So if you can see here, you can see the swelling occurring. So that is nothing but arthritis. It is a skeletal disorder. Next important skeletal disorder is osteoporosis. So osteoporosis is an age-related disorder which is caused by the decrease in the bone mass, and it is usually seen in women. So it is an age-related disorder which is characterized by decreased bone mass, and therefore because of the decrease in the density of the bone or the bone weight, it leads to a lot of fractures. So chances of fractures are very high, and this particular disorder is mainly because of the decreased level of estrogen. So as and when we age, the estrogen level will start decreasing. But if it decreases beyond the limit, then it will lead to the loss of the bone mass, or the density of the bone or the weight of the bone will drastically reduce, leading to a lot of fractures and all that. So that is called as osteoporosis, and this is also a skeletal disorder. Moving further, one more disorder of the skeleton, it is the gout. So gout is nothing but the inflammation of joints due to accumulation of uric acid crystals. So we know that the uric acid has to get eliminated out of a body. Sometimes the uric acid will not get eliminated out of a body, and they will go and start storing themselves in the joints. So therefore leading to inflammation of the joints, and that inflammation is called as the gout. So this is also a skeletal disorder. So this was about this particular session wherein we studied about the different bones of a skeletal system, wherein we studied about the bones of the axial skeleton and the appendicular skeleton, and also we studied about the different disorders of the skeletal and skeleton system and the muscle. So I hope you understood this session well. With this, the chapter comes to an end. So we shall meet again in the coming sessions with a new chapter. Thank you.